Hello there and welcome back to the Sleep Science channel, where tonight you'll be slipping gently into one of the strangest and most important chapters of Earth's history, the Cambrian explosion. Imagine opening your eyes not on the familiar blue-green planet you know, but on an alien Earth, barren continents stretching like rusted scars across the horizon, seas lapping at rocky coasts, but not a single blade of grass or flower in sight. The land is silent, wind-scoured and lifeless. All the action, all the drama is taking place beneath the waves. And when I say action, I mean it. This is the chapter of history where life suddenly decides to get ambitious. It's an ecological fireworks show. New body plans, new defenses, new ways to hunt. And you probably wouldn't survive a single minute if you got dropped in. Too many teeth, too many spines, too many awkward evolutionary prototypes ready to nibble on a time traveler. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And while you're at it, drop your location and local time in the comments. I love seeing where in the world and at what hour you're all listening. Now dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You find yourself gazing at the Cambrian Earth, around 541 million years ago. The continents are not the green, leafy continents of today. They're dusty, bare, and eroded into strange shapes. Gondwana, the southern supercontinent, is already piecing itself together, though you wouldn't know it from a casual stroll. What you notice first is the color. The land is reddish and ochre, iron-rich and dry, while the seas shimmer a brilliant turquoise. Without plants to stabilize soil, the coastlines are raw and crumbling, their edges constantly reworked by tides. Standing barefoot here would be uncomfortable, partly because the ground is hard and sharp, but mostly because there's no soft grass, no moss, not even a weed to cushion your step. Life on land is microscopic at best, patchy colonies of bacteria, maybe a dark crust of cyanobacteria clinging to damp rocks. It's the ocean that hums with vitality, the way a crowded city glows from a distance at night. From the shore, you'd see the surface ripple with warmth, and just beneath those waves, entire worlds are in motion. Historically, this moment marks what scientists call the Cambrian explosion, a burst of biological innovation unlike anything before it. For billions of years prior, life had been small, simple, and soft-bodied. A few sponges, maybe a jellyfish drifting in silence, and lots of microbial mats coating the seafloor. But now, suddenly, shells, eyes, claws, and teeth appear. Charles Darwin himself, back in 1859, scratched his head over this mystery. He called it a serious difficulty for his theory, because how could so much variety erupt so fast? Historians still argue whether Darwin underestimated the fossil record's gaps, or if the explosion really was a freak evolutionary sprint. You picture the planet's atmosphere above you, pale blue, still a little hazy, because oxygen levels are just climbing high enough to support these new hungry metabolisms. It's not yet breathable for you, you'd suffocate in a few minutes. But for the creatures of the sea, this extra oxygen is jet fuel. It powers muscles, fuels nervous systems, and makes the invention of movement, real, purposeful swimming, possible. Think of it as an ancient energy drink, the ultimate pre-workout, except instead of hitting the gym, trilobites are about to hit the sediment in style. And here's a quirky little tidbit. The moon would look bigger in the Cambrian sky. That's because it was closer. Tidal forces were stronger, tides themselves higher and more dramatic. You imagine waves surging onto the lifeless shore, pulling back, and exposing microbial mats like slimy carpets. Every day, the ocean breathes onto the land and retreats again, leaving temporary puddles that shimmer under a younger, hotter sun. You kneel at the water's edge and dip your hand in. Warm, briny, a little thicker than you expect, full of dissolved minerals and drifting plankton. Beneath the surface, the seafloor is not yet carved with coral reefs. Instead, it's flat, soft, and textured with those mats of bacteria. Strange shapes are moving, early arthropods, spiny worms, and creatures you'd hesitate to even call animals. Their outlines distort in the light, reminding you of how foreign this world is. There's a funny thought. If you brought a beach chair here, sunscreen would be pointless. Not because you'd burn too quickly, but because sunscreen itself hadn't been invented yet. In fact, the ancient Egyptians would much later try crocodile dung as a form of sunblock. You're better off skipping the suntan altogether and staying submerged with the trilobites. And so you linger at the Cambrian shoreline, feeling the silence of the land press against the cacophony of the sea. No birds call overhead, no crickets chirp at night. Just the wind sighing across bare rock and the endless heartbeat of the tides. The stage is set, the curtains of deep time are lifting, and the first great drama of complex life is about to unfold beneath those glowing turquoise waves. The first thing you notice as you wade a little deeper into this Cambrian world is the air above your head. It feels heavier somehow, as if the sky itself is still working out the recipe for breathable atmosphere. Oxygen levels have only recently taken a jump, rising from low, suffocating traces to something approaching a livable mix for active creatures in the sea. For billions of years, Earth's seas had been a murky cocktail of gases, with methane and carbon dioxide doing most of the heavy lifting. You'd think of it as a toxic cocktail, like ordering a drink that comes with a warning label and a fire extinguisher. But by this time, photosynthetic microbes have been pumping out oxygen for ages, and the atmosphere is finally tipping towards something recognizable. If you glance upward, the color of the sky has shifted from pale, hazy white to a true blue, though still not as crisp as the one you know. Sunlight cuts through the atmosphere a little differently, painting the shallow seas with a silvery sheen. You imagine the sun itself shining just a bit weaker, because it was. Back in the Cambrian, the sun's output was a few percent lower, yet the greenhouse gases in the air kept the planet surprisingly warm. Historians still argue whether these fluctuations in sunlight and carbon dioxide triggered the bursts of evolutionary innovation, or just gave life enough stability to try new tricks. Of course, the atmosphere is not only about oxygen. Nitrogen, carbon dioxide, and traces of sulfur float around too, and every storm has a drama all its own. Imagine thunderheads piling over the barren shore, lightning crackling across landscapes devoid of trees. No forests to break the wind, no vegetation to hold soil. So when it rains, it pours and the land bleeds into the sea. That runoff delivers minerals, stirring up nutrients that feed the shallows. In a way, every storm here is a fertilizer delivery service, messy but effective. You take in the soundscape. Instead of bird song or buzzing insects, the only noise is the hiss of wind and the low boom of distant thunder. It's like standing in the middle of a desert storm, except the air smells more metallic, laced with sulfur and brine. And every drop of rain that splashes into the ocean carries whispers of change, as if the weather itself is a collaborator in evolution's grand experiment. There's a historical fact worth tucking away. Around this time, the Earth's magnetic field was stabilizing after centuries of fluctuation. That field, invisible but crucial, helps shield the surface from cosmic radiation. Without it, these tender new creatures in the sea might have been fried by solar storms. It's a reminder that evolution doesn't just depend on the creatures themselves. It leans heavily on cosmic and planetary circumstances that line up just right. And here's your quirky tidbit for the evening. Lightning may have struck the seas with such intensity that nitrogen fixation was turbocharged. That means bolts of lightning literally fertilize the oceans by converting nitrogen in the air into forms that microbes could use. You can picture it, flash after flash, turning the shallows into a biochemical buffet. It's as if the sky was zapping life into overdrive, though I promise, no Frankenstein monsters were stitched together. Just trilobites slowly realizing dinner was getting easier to find. Looking down into the shallows, you realize that oxygen levels underwater vary wildly. In some deeper spots, the ocean is still anoxic, meaning no oxygen at all, a suffocating blackness where only certain microbes survive. But along the sunlit shelves, oxygen saturates the water, feeding the muscles of swimming creatures. This patchwork of oxygen-rich and oxygen-poor zones creates a kind of evolutionary chessboard. Predators flourish where oxygen is plentiful. Scavengers linger in the shadows where competitors can't follow. There's something strangely relaxing about watching it unfold. You see early animals drifting like dream fragments, suspended in green-blue light. Tiny plankton bloom near the surface, turning the water hazy with life. Larger shapes dart below, shadows against the seabed. Every breath of oxygen has set off a cascade of possibilities, new metabolism, stronger movements, and eventually, the invention of speed itself. Speed, you think, must have felt like magic the first time it happened. If you were reckless enough to climb back onto the land and inhale deeply, your lungs wouldn't last long. Even at these rising levels, there's not enough oxygen in the Cambrian air to keep a human going. You'd cough, stumble, and collapse like someone who tried running a marathon at high altitude. But the ocean creatures, they're thriving. For them, this increase in oxygen is like winning the evolutionary lottery. You take a slow step forward into the water, letting waves lap at your waist, then your chest. It's warm, like a shallow tropical bay, and clear enough that sunlight pours down in shafts. You imagine the surface breaking above you in pale patterns, while below, ecosystems spread like patchwork quilts across the seabed. It's calm now, but every so often, a gust of wind rips across the sea, stirring currents, carrying oxygen deeper, and pulling nutrients upward. You realize you're watching a system in balance, precarious but functional, the kind of delicate balance that life thrives on. It's worth pausing to appreciate how fragile this moment was. Without oxygen, without a protective sky, without nutrient cycles driven by weather, the Cambrian explosion might never have happened. And if it hadn't, well, you wouldn't be here, sitting in bed, listening to a stranger whisper about trilobites. The chain of cause and effect stretches right from those lightning storms to your own tired eyes tonight. Funny how survival sometimes depends less on claws and shells, and more on whether the planet decides to be generous with its chemistry. You drift now toward the map of continents, though in the Cambrian it's not the globe you recognize. Instead of the neatly arranged 7 pieces you grew up coloring in school, Earth's landmasses are gathering in odd clumps, breaking apart in others, and slowly sliding across the surface like ice on a pond. The giant southern landmass of Gondwana is beginning to take shape, sprawling across much of the southern hemisphere. It's not a single smooth chunk yet, but more of a patchwork quilt, stitched from what will one day become Africa, South America, Antarctica, Australia, and India. You'd need a lot of imagination and maybe a little wine to recognize the future outlines. From your vantage point, Gondwana sits close to the pole, tilted under a pale Cambrian sun. This means that the equatorial zones are mostly ocean, and that matters more than you'd think. Shallow tropical seas form broad continental shelves, and it's here in these warm, nutrient-rich waters that life flourishes. The continents themselves, still barren, reddish, weathered, with rivers cutting across empty plains. You could walk for weeks and not see a single fern or tree. Just rock, sand, and the occasional microbial crust clinging desperately to damp edges. Historically, this continental shuffle marks one of Earth's great tectonic transitions. Plate tectonics was already carving and recombining landmasses long before the Cambrian, But around this time, the stage was set for long stretches of shallow ocean, and shallow seas are life's playground. Deeper waters, dark and oxygen-poor, offered fewer options, but along these sunny shelves, energy and nutrients collide. You could almost think of them as gigantic tide pools, just scaled up to continents. You might be tempted to sketch out a Cambrian map in your notebook, but be careful. Historians still argue whether the precise positions of the continents are nailed down or just fuzzy approximations. Paleomagnetism, the trick of reading ancient rock minerals to see where they pointed toward the magnetic poles, is helpful but not perfect. It's like trying to reassemble a puzzle after someone spilled half the pieces under the couch. Still, Gondwana's growth had consequences. With so much land clumped near the south, ocean circulation patterns were different. Currents swirled across the globe in new routes, carrying heat and nutrients in ways unfamiliar to modern Earth. Picture vast conveyor belts of water looping around barren coasts, dragging oxygen into some basins and leaving others stagnant. Evolution, as always, is both helped and hindered by these planetary plumbing systems. Now for a quirky tidbit. Scientists think that some Cambrian seas may have been tinted green, not blue, because of high plankton concentrations. Imagine floating above Gondwana's shore and looking down, not into the Caribbean-style turquoise of a vacation brochure, but into something that looks more like split-pea soup. Not exactly the postcard shot, though it was perfect for hungry filter feeders. If you close your eyes, you can almost feel the weight of time. The continents creak and shift imperceptibly beneath your feet. A mountain range begins to rumble into existence along one edge, while on the opposite margin, erosion grinds another into dust. The land may look lifeless, but it's a restless lifelessness, the kind that reminds you geology has its own version of breathing. One of the quieter side effects of this continental arrangement was tidal dynamics. With land masses in unusual positions and the moon closer than today, tides were exaggerated in some regions. You picture enormous tidal flats stretching for miles, water pouring in and out in daily pulses. On those flats, microbial mats spread in slippery carpets, their surface glistening under the sun. At low tide, they're exposed, crackling and drying, only to revive as water rolls back. If you've ever overcooked lasagna noodles until they fused into a single sheet, you've got a decent mental picture. From above, the Earth of this era looks strange. Continents bare and rust-colored, oceans warm and greenish, clouds swirling thick with storms. But the real marvel is invisible from orbit. It's hidden under the waves among the continental shelves. There, trilobites scuttle like armored beetles, worms churn through soft sediment, and predators cruise with newfound grace. Gondwana may dominate the south, but the true empire belongs to the oceans. It's hard not to laugh a little at the irony. Humans spend so much effort mapping continents, planting flags, and drawing borders. But here in the Cambrian, the continents themselves are nothing more than silent spectators, stage platforms for the roaring theater of life offshore. All the real drama is aquatic, and the ocean doesn't care about your borders. It just laps at the stone, carrying secrets of evolution in every tide. You pause, leaning back into this view of shifting continents, listening to the groan of tectonic plates like distant thunder. Earth is unsettled, dynamic, a restless child turning over in bed. And all the while, life is adapting, ready to take advantage of every new coastline Gondwana creates. The water grows shallower as you drift forward, and now you find yourself gliding over the continental shelves, the wide, sunlit zones where most Cambrian life is unfolding. If the deep ocean was a quiet cathedral, these shelves are more like crowded markets, bustling and noisy in their own wordless way. You see sunlight dapple through the waves, bouncing off the sandy seafloor in golden ripples, and you realize why so many creatures decided to try their luck here. Shallow seas are warm, oxygenated, and filled with nutrients. They are nature's version of beachfront property. The warmth comes first. Global temperatures in the Cambrian hovered higher than today's, and with greenhouse gases still thick in the air, the oceans retain their heat like giant bathtubs. Standing waist-deep in this world feels less like wading into modern seawater and more like slipping into a spa pool. That warmth meant the chemistry of the ocean was lively. Gases dissolved quickly, minerals stayed suspended, and nutrients cycled in a way that fed explosions of plankton. Every breath of the water carried food, like soup that never ran out of broth. You crouch and run your fingers along the bottom. The sand is softer than you expect, less gritty and more like powder. That's because there's no crushed coral or seashell debris yet. The builders of reefs haven't really arrived. Instead, the seafloor is mostly eroded minerals from the continents and layers of microbial mats. Every time a wave rolls in, the sand shifts in tiny avalanches, burying and uncovering tracks left behind by wandering trilobites. Historically, these shallow seas were the epicenters of the Cambrian explosion. Fossil evidence from places like Chengjiang in China or the Burgess Shale in Canada shows us that almost every major animal body plan began here. Arthropods, mollusks, echinoderms, whole lineages that would dominate the next half-billion years, emerged from these shelves. Charles Walcott, who discovered the Burgess Shale in 1909, probably didn't realize he was peering at the blueprint of modern ecosystems. Historians still argue whether these shallow environments were uniquely special, or if they simply fossilized better, preserving a biased snapshot of history. The water isn't crystal clear everywhere. In some zones, blooms of cyanobacteria and plankton turn it a murky green, thick with food for filter feeders. You watch tiny early sponges straining the water, pulling out nutrients grain by grain. In other places, where currents sweep stronger, the water clears and predators patrol the open space like sentinels. These shelves are patchy mosaics, muddy here, sandy there, rocky in spots where tectonic forces lift up ridges. Each pocket offers a different stage for evolution to rehearse. And here's a quirky tidbit. Evidence suggests that some shallow Cambrian seas may have glowed faintly at night, thanks to bioluminescent plankton. Imagine floating on your back under a bigger moon, watching the waves sparkle with pinpricks of green light. It's the same kind of glow you might still see today in certain bays, only here it would have been even more alien. No sounds of gulls overhead, no hum of cicadas on the shore, just silence and shimmering water. Like camping under stars that decided to take a swim. Currents sweep nutrients from the deeper ocean up into these shelves, and storms stir them even further. After every Cambrian thunderstorm, rivers dump fresh minerals into the sea, feeding plankton and fueling entire food webs. You can almost picture the ecosystem as a chain reaction. Lightning sparks rain, rain delivers nutrients, nutrients spark blooms, blooms feed trilobites, trilobites feed predators. It's the world's earliest trickle-down economy, and for once, it actually works. The creatures themselves are both familiar and strange. You see trilobites scuttling like armored cockroaches, leaving parallel grooves in the sand. Tiny worm-like animals wriggle just below the surface, their bodies churning the sediment in endless loops. It's not glamorous work, but it oxygenates the seabed, paving the way for richer communities to form. Overhead, primitive jellyfish drift with hypnotic pulses, catching whatever they bump into. Everything here has found a way to exploit the sunlit shallows, and the result is a riot of experimentation. You lean back, letting the water cradle you and gaze into the hazy distance. The shelf seems endless, a vast shallow stage stretching for hundreds of kilometers. And it's here in this quiet, glowing soup that life is not only surviving but thriving with enthusiasm. The Cambrian explosion doesn't feel like a sudden bang. It feels like the steady hum of innovation. one creature tinkering, another adjusting, all driven by the richness of these warm coastal seas. The joke, of course, is that none of these creatures would appreciate beachfront property the way you do. They aren't sipping coconut drinks or lounging under umbrellas. For them, the shallows are a buffet, and survival means keeping one step ahead of neighbors who might eat you, or invent a brand new claw to try. If you ever felt awkward at a neighborhood potluck, remember this. The Cambrian seas were one long potluck where showing up with the wrong dish could get you eaten. You float there, half amused, half awed, realizing that these shelves are the true incubators of the modern world. Every step you take today on land has roots in this shallow water, in this sunlit soup of possibility. As you let yourself sink closer to the seabed, you feel the texture beneath your hands change. It isn't sand exactly, not rock either. It's slippery, almost slimy, with a faint resilience like damp carpet. You realize you're touching one of the Cambrian world's strangest dominions, microbial mats. These vast, layered colonies of cyanobacteria and other microbes cover much of the shallow seafloor like sprawling living rugs. They're not much to look at, flat, gelatinous, a bit gray-green, but they are quietly among the most important architects of this era. For billions of years, microbial mats had been the rulers of the earth. Long before trilobites decided to scuttle, mats ruled every coastline, trapping sediments, pumping out oxygen, and shaping chemical cycles. Here in the Cambrian, they still reign in many places, though they're beginning to face their first serious challenge: hungry animals. Worms and grazing arthropods tear into the mats, burrowing and scraping, shredding patches that once lay undisturbed. Evolution is inventing bulldozers, and the old microbial pavement is starting to crack. Historically, geologists can still trace these mats in ancient rocks. Stromatolites, layered structures built by microbes, mark the fingerprints of mats going back more than 3 billion years. In the Cambrian, stromatolites still exist, but they're shrinking like retired champions watching newcomers take the stage. Historians still argue whether grazing alone drove their decline, or whether changing ocean chemistry also played a role. Kneeling down, you watch tiny filaments wave in the current. Cyanobacteria at the mat's surface are busy with photosynthesis, sipping sunlight and exhaling oxygen. Beneath them, darker layers host microbes that specialize in other tricks: sulfur eaters, nitrogen fixers, each stacked like tenants in an apartment block. It's a vertical city without a skyline, self-contained, and it's been holding things together for longer than any animal lineage ever will. Here's your quirky tidbit. Some microbial mats are so resilient that they've survived all the way to today in places like Shark Bay in Australia. They're like living fossils, proof that sometimes evolution doesn't need a makeover. Imagine if your childhood beanbag chair somehow made it into the 21st century still looking stylish. That's the mats. But as you run your hand across the mat's surface, you notice burrows poking through, little tubes leading downward. These are the fingerprints of worms, new engineers of the seafloor. Their wriggling bodies churn the sediment, pulling oxygen deeper than mats alone could reach. The seafloor is no longer a smooth carpet but a patchwork quilt, punctured and stirred. To the worms, this is dinner. To the mats, it's vandalism. Predators follow the trail. You see an arthropod scraping at the surface, peeling off slimy layers to eat the microbes inside. The mat recoils in silence, powerless to resist, slowly regenerating only to be grazed again. It's a cycle that plays out across kilometers of seabed. Mats grow, animals graze, sediments shift. Life is reshaping its own foundations, one wriggle and scrape at a time. The light filtering down paints the mats in eerie hues. Where cyanobacteria cluster thick, the green glows faintly. In other spots, pigments shimmer red or brown, protective shields against the Cambrian sun. The effect is otherworldly, like walking across a seafloor quilt stitched from algae and mud. Every step leaves a depression that slowly fills in as microbes crawl back into place. And yet, despite their apparent vulnerability, mats remain stubborn survivors. You think about their persistence, how these quiet microbial sheets outlived mass extinctions, continental shifts, even meteor strikes. They've seen Earth change color and climate countless times. Trilobites may rise and vanish, but the mats, they just keep humming, photosynthesizing, laying low like the background track of evolution. The humor here is subtle but worth noting. While flashy Cambrian predators like Anomalocaris get all the documentary spotlight, it's the mats that keep the oxygen flowing and the sediment stable. It's like watching a band where the drummer never gets credit but keeps the beat that everyone else relies on. You might call them the unsung heroes, or if you're feeling cheeky, the unsung slimers. You hover for a while, running your fingertips along the surface, watching small creatures carve trails through the living fabric. Each track tells a story of survival. Some end abruptly where a predator struck. Others loop endlessly as if the animal lost its sense of direction. The mats themselves carry no grudges. They just grow back, indifferent to the drama above. It's strangely soothing. The mats pulse with the rhythm of photosynthesis, the seafloor glows with muted color, and life swirls above like restless dancers on a stage. For a moment, you feel as if you're sitting in a cathedral made not of stone but of slime and sunlight. And in that hush, you realize, without these mats, the Cambrian seas would not hum, and neither would you. The dim light deepens as you slip further into Cambrian waters, and suddenly you notice something gleaming in the shadows. Tiny points of brightness flash in the gloom like scattered stars. They're not stars, of course. They're eyes, newly evolved, and they are quietly rewriting the rules of the ocean. Until now, life had been fumbling mostly by touch and smell. But in the Cambrian, vision bursts onto the scene like someone flipping on the stadium lights. Suddenly, predators can see their prey. Prey can spot a threat in time to scuttle away, and camouflage begins its long career as a survival strategy. Imagine the first trilobite with compound eyes, perched on the seafloor, swiveling its gaze across the murky water. Instead of bumping blindly into neighbors, it now sees a panorama of motion, shapes, and shimmering light. That advantage is like skipping the tutorial level in a video game and jumping straight to expert mode. Historically, trilobites really are the poster children of early vision. Fossils still show the calcite lenses of their compound eyes, preserved like tiny jeweled mosaics. Historians still argue whether eyes emerged in just a few lineages that spread their innovation, or if multiple groups stumbled into sight independently, like competing inventors filing the same patent. You tilt your head, watching one of these trilobites scuttle away as the shadow of a predator sweeps overhead. Its eyes catch the movement, and in an instant its legs pump faster, leaving a trail in the sand. The predator, a sleek early arthropod, pauses, as if annoyed that lunch escaped. In this moment, sight has tipped the scales. And here's a quirky little tidbit. Some trilobite eyes were so sophisticated that they could detect polarized light, a trick even many modern animals don't manage. Imagine having sunglasses built directly into your skull, functional, stylish, and impossible to misplace. The invention of eyes didn't just change how creatures hunted, it reshaped the entire ecosystem. Once vision arrived, being soft-bodied and slow was a liability. Suddenly, shells, spines, and speed weren't optional. They were survival essentials. You see early worms experimenting with burrows, hiding from those watchful stares. Others evolve armor, clunky at first but better than nothing. The seafloor begins to look like a medieval fair, full of improvisational armor and panicked burrowing. Close by, you spot a peculiar scene. A cluster of small arthropods raising their front appendages in unison, possibly a primitive form of display or warning. Maybe it's a coincidence, maybe communication. But with eyes around, even behavior shifts. What good is a display if no one can see it? The very act of being visible rewrites evolution's playbook. It's worth pausing on a historical comparison. Before the Cambrian and the Ediacaran period, most creatures were soft, frond-like, and moved very little. They had no need for vision in a dim, static world. But now, with oxygen rising and predators on the prowl, eyes become tools of both terror and opportunity. You can almost hear the evolutionary arms race revving up, as if someone just waved a green flag at the starting line. The sensory landscape transforms too. Where before the ocean was a muffled blur of chemical cues, now it's a dance of shadows, contrasts, and movements. The water shimmers with possibility, every flicker of light sparking instinctive responses. You watch a trilobite pause, swivel its compound eyes, and retreat into the mud. A predator passes above, jaws snapping at nothing. Vision has created a new game. Hide and seek, only the stakes are survival. And yet there's humor in this too. Imagine being the first animal to evolve sight. One day, your descendants are groping in the dark. The next, you're staring at your neighbors like, "Wait, you guys look like that." The awkwardness must have been universal. Nothing says evolutionary leap like realizing your lunch has a face. Farther out in the twilight zone of the Cambrian Sea, you glimpse glimmers that suggest even more elaborate eyes developing. Some creatures boast stalks with multiple lenses, scanning in all directions. Others may see in low light, prowling the dusk where prey feel falsely safe. The ecosystem is fracturing into niches not just of body shape, but of perception itself. You let yourself sink, resting on the seabed surrounded by these glowing points. The silence is broken only by faint movements, tiny clouds of sand, shadows slipping past. The world feels newly awake, newly aware. In the Cambrian, eyes don't just let animals see, they let the ocean see itself. And once seen, nothing can ever go back to being invisible again. Your gaze settles now on a creature that seems both familiar and alien, scuttling across the sandy seafloor with the confidence of something that knows its design works. Trilobites. These armored arthropods dominate the Cambrian stage, and you can't help but watch them with a mix of curiosity and affection. They look like giant pill bugs or horseshoe crabs, segmented bodies glinting under shafts of light, legs hidden beneath as they scurry along. They are not the loudest or flashiest Cambrian creatures, but they are easily among the most successful, so successful that they will march across Earth's history for almost 270 million years before finally bowing out. That's longer than the dinosaurs ever managed, and much longer than humans have been around. You crouch low to observe. A trilobite trundles by, antennae sweeping ahead like cautious feelers. Its compound eyes glitter, scanning for danger. Its many legs paddle gently against the sediment, raising tiny clouds of silt in its wake. It pauses, flexes its body, and then digs, vanishing halfway into the mud. Buried, only the ridge of its shell shows, like a camouflaged coin on the seafloor. You can't help but smile. Trilobites had mastered the art of lying low long before modern critters like flounder or stingrays ever thought of it. Historically, trilobites were among the very first arthropods, a lineage that would later include crabs, spiders, and insects. They were also extraordinarily diverse. Some species grew only a centimeter long, while others stretched past 70 centimeters, big enough to cover your dinner plate. Fossil beds today are littered with their remains, so much so that trilobites became one of the earliest fossils recognized by curious humans in antiquity. Ancient Romans thought they were the remains of squashed insects. Medieval scholars called them petrified toads. Historians still argue whether trilobites first evolved in deep water and migrated shallower, or whether they began in the shallows and later explored the depths. You lean closer to see the detail. The exoskeleton is made of calcite, layered and jointed, allowing protection and flexibility. Like modern arthropods, trilobites had to molt to grow. Imagine the entire seabed littered with empty shells after a mass molting event. It would look like a battlefield of armor left behind. The irony is that predators often took advantage of these moments, catching trilobites when their new shells were still soft. It was the Cambrian equivalent of waiting outside the locker room for someone still tying their shoes. And here's your quirky tidbit. Some trilobites could roll themselves into tight balls, much like modern pill bugs, tucking their legs inside and presenting nothing but a hard shell to any attacker. Fossils have been found frozen in this rolled-up state, as if caught mid-defense for hundreds of millions of years. There's something endearing about it, like catching a creature mid-yoga pose and realizing it never had the chance to uncurl. You watch as a small swarm of trilobites moves together, perhaps stirred by a passing current or the shadow of a predator. Their tracks etch the seabed in parallel lines, crisscrossing like scribbles on a notepad. These traces are so common that paleontologists have given them names: Cruziana for furrowed feeding trails, Rucificus for resting impressions. Long before fossils captured bodies, these tracks captured behavior, the first diaries of animal activity. You're essentially reading trilobite graffiti, carved into the Cambrian mud. The ecosystem around them shifts with their presence. As grazers, trilobites help stir up microbial mats, recycling nutrients back into the water. As prey, they fuel the stomachs of predators like Anomalocaris. They are both engineers and fodder, both survivors and sacrifices, and somehow in their stubborn persistence, they embody the Cambrian better than almost anything else. One larger trilobite trundles past, its eyes swiveling toward you. For a moment, you almost expect it to pause and size you up, but you're too big, too strange, and far beyond its comprehension. It scuttles on, antennae flicking, more interested in the microbial mats ahead. Watching it vanish into the haze, you realize how quietly profound their story is. These creatures will thrive for longer than the lifespan of continents, only to disappear in the Great Permian extinction, leaving their intricate fossils for humans to marvel at. The humor here is in their sheer ordinariness. Trilobites were everywhere, doing their thing for eons, never flashy, just steady. They're the evolutionary equivalent of background music, essential, persistent, rarely noticed until someone points out how much they shape the mood. You almost want to pat one gently and say, "Thanks for carrying the Cambrian on your armored shoulders." For now, you lie back against the seafloor, letting trilobites scuttle around you in steady lines. Their legs tickle the sand, their eyes glimmer faintly, and their tracks stitch the seabed into a record of motion. In the stillness, you understand. In this Cambrian sea, trilobites aren't just creatures, they're time itself, marching across the ages one tiny step at a time. The seafloor shivers beneath you, and at first you think it's just the current tugging at the sand. But then you realize the movement is coming from below. Something is wriggling, tunneling, stirring the sediments in restless patterns. Worms. Not the glossy garden kind you toss onto a fishing hook, but a bewildering array of Cambrian pioneers, burrowing creatures whose simple bodies are reshaping the ocean floor in ways more dramatic than any flashy predator. You lean close, watching the surface bubble slightly as one worm pushes upward. Its soft body glistens in the filtered light before it slips back down, leaving only a faint depression. Another has carved a thin, spiraling tunnel beneath the microbial mat, like a child doodling circles in the sand. These trails, like those of trilobites, will one day be fossilized as trace fossils, the earliest signatures of active, mobile life working underground. Historically, this Cambrian substrate revolution was a big deal. Before worms came along, the seabed was relatively undisturbed, a flat, mat-covered surface where microbes ruled. But once burrowers appeared, everything changed. Sediment got mixed, oxygen seeped deeper, and nutrients recycled in new ways. Suddenly, the ocean floor wasn't just a passive stage, it was an active, churning environment. Historians still argue whether this burrowing was a cause or a consequence of the Cambrian explosion. Did worms stir up the ecosystem, or were they simply one more invention in an already crowded era? The burrows you see are diverse. Some are shallow and horizontal like highways under the mats. Others are vertical shafts, plunging deeper, safe retreats when predators prowl. Some worms secrete mucus, lining their tunnels like wallpaper. Others collapse their paths as they move, constantly rebuilding. You imagine the seafloor as an underground city, bustling with unseen commuters, each digging, feeding, hiding, and occasionally bumping into a neighbor in awkward silence. Here's your quirky tidbit. Some of these worms may have been armored with tiny plates or spines, like scale mail draped along their bodies. Fossils of creatures like Wiwaxia show rows of little spikes, giving them the look of moving toothbrushes or misplaced hairbrushes. Not exactly cuddly, but effective. From above, the impact is visible. Microbial mats that once formed smooth carpets are now riddled with holes, shredded by hungry mouths. The worms munch and churn, leaving mats in tatters, forcing microbes to adapt. The once dominant microbial empire is shrinking, destabilized by a quiet revolution of burrowers. To the worms, this isn't sabotage, it's dinner. To evolution, it's opportunity. You imagine predators watching from above. For them, worms are snacks, plucked out of burrows when caught too close to the surface. The worms, in turn, respond by burrowing deeper, twisting into intricate spirals and evolving tougher skins. It's the Cambrian version of hide-and-seek, though the stakes are somewhat higher than in your childhood backyard. The seafloor feels alive beneath you now, every grain of sand shifting subtly as worms dig and recycle. It's oddly soothing, like lying on a mattress with a massage feature set to low. You let yourself relax into the sensation, watching trails appear, collapse, and reappear. This constant stirring is not chaos. It's the quiet hum of a system finding new balance. And the humor of it all. While giant predators like Anomalocaris grab the headlines, the worms are the true revolutionaries. They don't look impressive. They don't star in toy lines or museum posters, but they rewired the ocean floor in ways that shaped everything that followed. They're the underappreciated civil engineers of Earth's biosphere. You can almost hear them muttering, "We dig, therefore we are." As the light dims toward evening, you see worm tracks glinting faintly under moonlight reflected through the water. The seabed is a tapestry of movement, every line and burrow a story of survival. You exhale, sinking into the calm realization that sometimes history isn't made by the loudest or flashiest. Sometimes it's written quietly, one wriggle at a time. You drift farther along the shallow shelf, and soon you come upon a different kind of neighborhood entirely. Here, the seafloor rises in delicate clusters, not the flat microbial carpets you've seen, but fragile skeletons stacked together in little mounds. These are the earliest reef builders of the Cambrian, sponges, early corals, and a host of other skeletal pioneers, assembling themselves into habitats that will one day reshape oceans around the world. The first impression is one of subtle beauty. Sunlight filters through the water and scatters over these patchy reef gardens, turning their porous structures into glowing lanterns. Sponges, simple yet elegant, rise like tubes and vases from the sand. Water flows through their bodies as they filter plankton, endlessly sipping, endlessly cleaning. It's not glamorous work, but it keeps the water clear and nutrient cycles steady. You could say sponges were the janitors of the Cambrian seas, quiet, unthanked, but indispensable. Historically, reefs of this era were far humbler than the sprawling coral paradises you might snorkel through today. They were often small, patchy, and dominated not by true corals, but by sponge-like organisms and enigmatic reef builders called archaeocyathidds. These strange, cup-shaped animals, now long extinct, were among the first to form skeletal frameworks that could support larger reef structures. Paleontologists still debate whether archaeocyathidds were true sponges or a unique lineage all their own. Either way, they left behind fossilized reef mounds, quiet monuments to their brief reign. You lean close to one of these clusters. Tiny pores dot the sponge walls, water flowing in and out like a living pump. The sponge doesn't chase or flee, doesn't even move much at all. Its strategy is patience, filtering liters of water every day to pull out microscopic food. Around it, the archaeocyathidds rise in nested cones, their walls perforated with holes that make them look like elaborate clay lanterns. Small arthropods crawl over the surfaces, scraping up leftovers, while worms weave between the openings, finding shelter in the skeletal maze. And here's a quirky tidbit. Later in Earth's history, sponges would help shape human art in an unexpected way. Ancient Greeks prized natural sea sponges as bathing tools, and even as brushes for painting and cleaning statues. So, in a way, the same creatures filtering Cambrian seas would one day scrub marble in Athens. Who knew sponges were destined for both ecological stability and bathroom fame? But the Cambrian reef is not just a pretty sight, it's a fortress and a nursery. The rigid frameworks give shelter to countless small creatures, protecting them from predators like Anomalocaris that prefer open hunting grounds. Inside the reef's labyrinth, tiny arthropods hide, mollusks graze, and worms curl safely in crevices. The reef hums with activity, each crevice a microcosm of survival. You hover near the top of a reef mound and realize how fragile it is. Unlike later coral reefs, which can grow for kilometers, these early reefs are patchy and easily broken by storms. When a strong current hits, pieces crack and tumble, scattering across the seafloor. Yet each fragment can seed a new mound, spreading the reef community slowly but surely. Evolution doesn't rush. It builds one fragile scaffold at a time. The humor here is gentle. For all their importance, sponges and archaeocyathidds are, frankly, a little boring to look at. They don't chase prey, don't glow dramatically, don't roll into armored balls like trilobites. They just sit, filter, and grow. But without them, the Cambrian Sea would lack structure, shelter, and stability. They're the wallflowers of evolution's dance, never flashy, but without them, the party falls apart. The light fades as you linger, and the reef begins to look like a city at dusk. Openings glow faintly as plankton drift past, and shadows of arthropods crawl across the sponge walls. You hear the faint whoosh of water rushing through porous bodies, a constant background rhythm. The reef is alive, not in a flashy way, but in the slow, steady persistence of builders who know their work will outlast them. You sink down against the sand, surrounded by these early reef architects. Their silence is calming, their patience contagious. In a world obsessed with claws and teeth, the sponges and corals remind you that survival sometimes comes not from speed or aggression, but from quietly holding your ground. You sense a shift in the water around you. The calm, filtering rhythm of the reef gives way to something sharper, more electric, like the room suddenly tensing when a predator walks in. You don't see it at first, just a shadow, long and sinuous, gliding with unsettling grace. Then it comes into view and you understand why Cambrian seas were never truly peaceful. Anomalocaris, the terror of its time. The odd shrimp, though calling it a shrimp is like calling a T-Rex a chicken. It glides closer, body rippling in undulating waves, flexible flaps along its sides moving in perfect coordination. At up to a meter long, it dwarfs most of its prey, casting a shadow that sends trilobites scattering like startled pigeons. Two long, spiny appendages extend forward like grasping arms, twitching as they sweep the sand for movement. At the front, its circular mouth gapes open, ringed with serrated plates that close like a pineapple slicer. It's not exactly the smile you want to wake up to. Historically, Anomalocaris has one of the most amusing scientific backstories. When its fossils were first discovered, paleontologists mistook the appendages for shrimp bodies, the mouth for a jellyfish, and the body for something else entirely. It took decades to realize these mismatched puzzle pieces belonged to a single superpredator. Historians still argue whether it was the apex hunter of its time or more of an opportunistic scavenger, nibbling on soft-bodied creatures and trilobites when it could. You watch as it locks onto a trilobite, appendages curling inward like claws. The trilobite tries its usual trick, scuttling away, but the predator's swimming flaps give it speed and maneuverability far beyond most Cambrian creatures. In an instant, the trilobite is caught, dragged toward that pineapple slicer mouth, and crushed with a final snap. The seafloor trembles as sand clouds billow, and then silence. The predator moves on, leaving behind faint grooves where its prey once scuttled. And here's your quirky tidbit. Despite its fearsome design, Anomalocaris may have had surprisingly weak bite pressure. Some fossil evidence suggests its circular mouthparts weren't strong enough to crack fully mineralized trilobite shells. Instead, it may have targeted softer creatures or molting trilobites with their freshly shed, vulnerable exoskeletons. Imagine the Cambrian's top predator being more of a picky eater, like someone refusing pistachio unless they're already shelled. Still, its presence rewrote the ecosystem. With a hunter like this on the prowl, prey species evolved new strategies, rolling up tighter, burrowing deeper, or developing spines and ridges. Every flick of Anomalocaris' tail set off a chain reaction in evolution's arms race. It wasn't just a predator, it was a teacher, forcing the ocean to innovate or perish. You hover above, marveling at its motion. The rippling flaps along its body catch the light, shimmering like ribbons in a breeze. Its eyes, compound, mounted on stalks, glitter with thousands of lenses, capable of spotting prey from afar. Compared to the simple light-sensing patches of earlier creatures, Anomalocaris sees the Cambrian world in vivid detail. In its gaze, nothing is safe. The humor here lies in perspective. If you were suddenly shrunk and dropped into the Cambrian, Anomalocaris would seem like a sea monster out of nightmare, chasing you with uncanny speed. But here, watching from safety, it's almost elegant, graceful, fluid, a work of evolutionary art. You can't help but respect it, even if you'd never volunteer to be on its menu. As it fades into the murk, the smaller creatures slowly re-emerge. Trilobites scuttle back to the mats, worms resume their digging, sponges continue their silent filtering. Life carries on cautiously, nervously, but relentlessly. You feel the tension linger in the water, the awareness that at any moment the shadow could return. And yet, strangely, you find the whole scene calming. Even in this world of claws and teeth, the rhythm persists. Predator strikes, prey hides, balance restores. It's not peace exactly, but it's equilibrium. You let yourself exhale, the image of Anomalocaris gliding through your mind like a dream you're glad you don't have to wake up in. The seafloor ahead looks calm again, but in the Cambrian, calm often hides the strangest surprises. You drift closer and notice a tiny creature inching along, its body bristling with spines. At first glance, you're not sure which way it's facing. Is it walking upright on stilts, crawling belly down like a worm, upside down maybe? This, you realize, is hallucigenia, a name that perfectly captures the confusion it caused paleontologists for decades. It looks less like an animal and more like something doodled on the margin of a bored student's notebook. Its body is long and soft, just a few centimeters in length, with pairs of spindly legs extending downward. But on its back, a row of stiff spines jutting upward like toothpicks stuck in a sausage. For years, scientists reconstructed Hallucigenia upside down, imagining it walked on those spines while its soft, tentacle-like legs waved in the water. The result looked so absurd that the name stuck, Hallucigenia, as if it were born from a fever dream. Only later, with better fossils, did researchers realize they had flipped the poor thing on its head. The spines were defensive armor, not stilts, and the soft tentacles were indeed its legs. Historians still argue whether its head has been correctly identified in every reconstruction, because this little oddball refuses to give up all its secrets. You lean close to watch. Its stubby claws grip the microbial mat, dragging it forward in slow motion. The spines glisten under the light, perfect deterrents for predators that might otherwise see an easy snack. Hallucigenia doesn't flee quickly, doesn't burrow deeply. It simply dares anyone to try chewing on a row of spikes. It's not elegant, but it's effective. Here's a quirky tidbit. The spines of Hallucigenia have been found fossilized with microstructures that suggest they were coated with a hard cuticle, maybe even crystalline in texture. Imagine biting into a piece of rock candy that fights back. Not a meal most predators would attempt twice. Nearby, a trilobite pauses as it encounters one. The arthropod's antennae twitch, brushing the spines, and then it wisely changes course. Better to scavenge elsewhere than to wrestle with a living pin cushion. The Hallucigenia continues on, oblivious, plodding its peculiar way across the seabed. The more you watch, the more you realize how bizarrely charming it is. This is not a streamlined hunter or a graceful swimmer. It's a living contradiction, a mashup of features that seem to have been borrowed from different creatures and glued together by accident. And yet, here it is, alive and thriving, proving that survival sometimes favors the strange just as much as the strong. There's humor here too. Imagine the first paleontologists in the 1970s trying to make sense of these fossils. They flipped the creature upside down, backwards, even inside out in some reconstructions. It was the zoological equivalent of trying to assemble IKEA furniture without instructions. You end up with something that technically stands, but no one is sure what it's supposed to be. And still, despite all that confusion, Hallucigenia has earned its place as one of the Cambrian's most iconic oddballs. Its descendants are thought to be related to velvet worms, those squishy little predators that still lurk in rainforests today, spraying gluey slime at their prey. From spiky seafloor crawler to glue-shooting jungle worm, it's an evolutionary glowdown, but at least the lineage is still here. You lie back in the water, letting the spiny silhouette drift past. It's almost meditative, the way it moves slowly, steadily, oblivious to how bizarre it looks. In the Cambrian, there was no normal. Every creature was an experiment, some elegant, some awkward, all temporary. Hallucigenia reminds you that evolution doesn't design masterpieces on the first try. It doodles, it plays, and sometimes the doodles walk straight out of history to leave paleontologists scratching their heads centuries later. You drift deeper into the Cambrian waters, lulled by the rhythm of trilobites scuttling and worms wriggling, when suddenly you notice something hovering in the gloom. It's small, barely the length of your hand, but it commands your attention instantly. 5 eyes glitter on stalks, swiveling independently like searchlights, and dangling from its head is a long, flexible proboscis ending in a claw-like grasping organ. This is Apobinia, and if you thought Hallucigenia was strange, prepare yourself. This creature looks like evolution drew it at 3 a.m. after one too many coffees. Apabinia swims with delicate ripples, using lobes along its sides to paddle gracefully, almost like a ribbon dancer underwater. Its body is segmented, flexible, with a fan-like tail that helps steer. But it's the head that steals the show, those 5 eyes scanning in all directions, and that improbable trunk reaching out, curling toward the sediment like a tiny vacuum hose. When it spots something edible, the proboscis darts down, pinches it up, and delivers it neatly into a round mouth tucked underneath the head. Efficiency, yes, but also comedy. You can't help but imagine it as a living arcade claw machine, forever fishing for snacks. Historically, Apabinia had its moment of fame in 1972 when paleontologist Harry Whittington unveiled its reconstruction. At a scientific conference, he revealed the 5-eyed, trunk-nosed oddity, and the audience reportedly burst into laughter. Not out of disrespect, but out of disbelief. Surely no animal could look like that. And yet, here it is. Historians still argue about its exact relationships. Was it closer to early arthropods, or part of an even stranger side branch now long gone? You watch as one Apabinia investigates the sand. Its proboscis snakes forward, poking into a burrow, and emerges with a small worm wriggling in its grasp. The claw snaps shut, and the prize is tucked swiftly into the hidden mouth. Efficiency cloaked in ridiculousness. It's hard not to admire the strategy. 5 eyes keep watch for predators, while the trunk keeps the mouth safely out of harm's way. Here's a quirky tidbit. The eyes of Apabinia may not have all been identical. Some researchers suggest the central pair could provide sharper vision, while the others offered broader peripheral awareness. In other words, this little creature might have been rocking both binocular focus and panoramic vision long before humans ever dreamed of inventing bifocals. The predators give Apabinia a wide berth. It isn't heavily armored, and it certainly doesn't look intimidating, but its agility and awareness make it a tough target. With 5 eyes constantly scanning, sneaking up on it would be like trying to steal cookies from someone with security cameras on every wall. From your vantage point, the scene looks oddly whimsical. Imagine dozens of Apabinia paddling gracefully through the water, their little trunks curling and flicking as they pluck at the sediment. It's like a parade of elephant-faced shrimp, each doing its own version of interpretive dance. You almost expect circus music to start playing in the background. And yet, despite their odd looks, they were survivors. They found food where others overlooked it, adapted to niches with little competition, and thrived in the chaotic Cambrian seas. Their very strangeness was their strength. There's a quiet lesson here, one that makes you chuckle. In the Cambrian, weird wasn't a disadvantage. It was often the ticket to success. If you stood out, if you bent the rules of body design, you might just carve out a space no one else had claimed. And Apabinia, with its 5 eyes and improbable trunk, did just that. As it drifts away, the light catches its shimmering body, the fan tail flicking softly. For a moment, it almost looks elegant, like a living kite trailing its ribbon through ancient waters. You let the image linger, the gentle absurdity of it soothing in its own way. Because here in the Cambrian, even the strangest designs find their place. And somehow, watching them float by, you feel the strangeness settling you into calm. The Cambrian waters grow restless now. You can sense the tension in the ecosystem, an invisible thread pulled tight. It isn't just one predator or one prey species anymore. It's an arms race, each adaptation provoking a countermeasure, each countermeasure inspiring something sharper, faster, stranger. What began as a trickle of evolutionary invention has become a cascade, and you, floating quietly in the shallows, feel as if you're watching the first great chess match of life play out across the seafloor. A trilobite scuttles by, its shell thicker than those you saw earlier. New ridges and spines protrude from its body, making it less appetizing for any hungry Anomalocaris. This armor didn't appear by accident. It's the direct answer to relentless predation, a literal hardening of the defenses. Yet as trilobites toughen, predators sharpen in return. You glimpse another Anomalocaris gliding overhead, its appendages longer, more articulate, better able to grip a rolling ball of prey. The arms race is underway, and no one can sit it out. Historically, scientists refer to this escalation as the Cambrian arms race, a period where predation pressures sparked an explosion of defensive and offensive traits: shells, spines, burrows, jaws, and speed. Before this, life was soft and slow, but now it is armored, mobile, alert. Historians still argue whether this burst was driven primarily by predator innovation or if environmental factors, oxygen levels, nutrient surges, primed the pump. Perhaps it was both, a perfect storm of opportunity and necessity. You watch worms burrow deeper into the sediment, abandoning the surface mats that once sustained them. Some are experimenting with armor of their own, tiny plates or spines that make them harder to swallow. Sponges, previously passive, are sprouting silica spicules like glass needles, discouraging anyone from munching casually. Even stationary creatures are saying, "Please think twice before you bite me." And here's your quirky tidbit. Some early mollusks may have been among the first creatures to experiment with true shells made of calcium carbonate. These weren't the elegant spirals you see in modern seashell shops, more like awkward little cones or plates, but they were revolutionary. Imagine the first predator trying to bite one and recoiling like someone who just crunched down on a jawbreaker. The battlefield is everywhere. Predators adapt vision, prey adapts camouflage. Prey dig burrows, predators learn to probe deeper. It's an endless loop, innovation feeding on innovation. For the first time, survival isn't just about existing, it's about outsmarting neighbors in real time. Evolution has shifted gears from slow geological packing to a rapid back-and-forth sprint. You notice one trilobite curl tightly into a ball as a shadow passes. Its spines jut outward like tiny barbs, making it a bristly, armored orb. The predator circles, prods once, then loses interest. For the trilobite, this is victory. Not glamorous, but effective. Every successful defense is a blueprint for future generations. And yet the humor is never far away. Watching these creatures adapt, you can't help but compare them to an awkward medieval tournament. Trilobites invent shields, worms dig moats, sponges grow spikes like caltrops, and predators show up like knights on ungainly horses, trying to invent new lances. It's chaotic, clumsy, and oddly endearing. Evolution, at this point, is less like a streamlined military strategy and more like a community theater production of war, with everyone improvising props. The water around you churns as smaller prey dart frantically from one hiding spot to another, chased by predators wielding new tricks. You realize that this arms race doesn't just shape bodies, it shapes behaviors. Creatures are learning not only how to defend themselves physically, but how to respond quickly, to hide, to dash, to play dead. The Cambrian world is discovering strategy. You close your eyes for a moment, listening to the distant ripple of fins, the scrape of armor on sand, the whisper of burrows collapsing as worms retreat. It is noisy in its own subtle way, this new orchestra of life. And though it might seem violent, the pattern is strangely reassuring. This is how ecosystems find their rhythm, through trial, error, escalation, and balance. As you exhale, the tension softens in your chest. Yes, the Cambrian arms race is fierce, but it's also creative, endlessly inventive, and more than a little ridiculous when seen from the calm distance of 500 million years. Watching it unfold, you can almost feel yourself drifting deeper into sleep, carried by the steady pulse of an ocean learning how to fight, and in doing so, learning how to live. The seabed grows steeper as you drift, and soon you find yourself peering into a world preserved in exquisite detail, not through your eyes alone, but through the strange time window of fossils. This is the Burgess Shale, a deposit high in what will one day be the Canadian Rockies. Right now, in the Cambrian, it is a shallow basin fed by silty avalanches that sweep delicate creatures into oxygen-poor mud. Millions of years later, those same muds will become dark shale, a fossil library preserving even the softest tissues in astonishing clarity. For now, you hover as if suspended between past and future, watching creatures live their brief lives before being immortalized in stone. Here, fragile worms glide over mats. There, arthropods scuttle, their legs transparent, their gills fluttering like lace. A jelly-like animal pulses in the water column, leaving only the faintest ripple. These are not creatures you would expect to fossilize. No hard shells, no bones. But the Burgess Shale keeps them as if the sea itself knew you'd one day want a perfect snapshot of the Cambrian dream. Historically, the Burgess Shale was discovered in 1909 by Charles Walcott, a paleontologist who stumbled upon slabs littered with delicate impressions. He collected over 65,000 specimens, storing them in drawers for decades. Only much later did scientists realize the full importance of what he'd found. Historians still argue whether Walcott truly understood the revolutionary nature of these fossils, or whether he downplayed them to fit within his tidy view of life's gradual march. Either way, the Burgess Shale remains one of Earth's most famous windows into deep time. You peer closer at one slab of seafloor. The outline of a hallucigenia scuttles past, spines jutting upward. Next to it, an opobinia curls its trunk to snatch up a worm. Their shadows cross for a moment, and then the mud collapses, burying them side by side. Millions of years later, their odd shapes will leave paleontologists chuckling, debating, revising. For now, they simply vanish into silt, unaware of their fate. And here's a quirky tidbit. When Burgess Shale fossils were first studied, some reconstructions were so wildly off base that one creature, Deinonychus, was drawn upside down with its feeding funnel pointing into the mud. It took years before anyone realized the poor thing had been standing on its head in the textbooks. The Cambrian must chuckle at how often humans misplace its puzzle pieces. The preservation here is astonishing. You can see faint impressions of gills, gut contents, even pigment spots where eyes once shimmered. Most fossil records give you bones and shells, the sturdy leftovers of life. But here, you see whispers of soft tissue, fleeting as soap bubbles, somehow captured forever. It's like opening an old diary and finding not only the words but also the scent of the ink. You drift higher, taking in the whole scene. Avalanches of fine sediment sweep down occasionally, smothering entire communities in an instant. It sounds grim, but in that smothering lies the gift of memory. Without these sudden burials, we might never know how strange and diverse the Cambrian truly was. The Burgess Shale doesn't just preserve bodies, it preserves possibility, reminding you that life's first experiments were far wilder than the neat categories modern textbooks suggest. The humor, of course, is in the randomness. Countless Cambrian creatures lived and vanished without a trace, while these unlucky few, buried in mudslides, became the stars of paleontology. Survival into stone depended less on strength and more on being in the wrong place at exactly the right time. Imagine being remembered for eternity just because you happened to nap in the path of a landslide. You run your hand over the imagined shale surface, feeling the outlines press deep. It's cool, smooth, textured with the shadows of creatures long gone. Above you, the Cambrian sea still stirs, alive and restless. But here, in this quiet basin, time is paused. The Burgess Shale holds its breath, capturing a fragment of a world otherwise lost to the currents. As you settle back, the thought soothes you. In every fossil impression, in every delicate trace, there is continuity. Life lived, died, was buried, and somehow, impossibly, became memory etched into stone. You drift, half awake, half asleep, comforted by the idea that even the most fragile things can endure across deep time. The water cools as you drift into a new stretch of Cambrian time. At first, it's subtle, a faint chill brushing your skin, a shift in the current. But then the change deepens, and you realize that the Cambrian seas were not a static paradise. They pulsed with climate swings, shifting temperatures that sculpted survival and extinction alike. Warm oceans dominated, yes, but they could also shiver without warning, plunging communities into crisis. You picture the Earth from space, continents clustered, oceans wide, and greenhouse gases swirling thick in the atmosphere. For much of the Cambrian, carbon dioxide levels were far higher than today, trapping warmth and keeping the seas like vast heated baths. That heat powered storms, stirred currents, and fed the plankton blooms that supported the explosion of life. But now and then, things tipped. Glaciations flickered across the southern continent of Gondwana, cooling waters and reshaping ocean chemistry. The Cambrian was not a steady hum. It was a song with dramatic pauses. Historically, these climate swings left fingerprints in the rocks. Geologists find shifts in carbon isotopes that mark sudden cooling events, sometimes tied to short-lived ice ages. Fossils record bursts of extinction, then rebounds of new life. Historians still argue whether these pulses were caused by tectonic reshuffling, volcanic outgassing, or even orbital wobbles that nudged sunlight differently across the globe. Whatever the cause, the Cambrian world was dynamic, never letting its creatures grow too comfortable. You hover near a patch of reef as the water around you cools. Sponges slow their pumping, trilobites scuttle sluggishly, and even predators hesitate. For creatures evolved in warmth, cold is a creeping thief, stealing energy bit by bit. Some adapt by burrowing deeper, retreating into sediments where temperatures are steadier. Others migrate toward the equator, chasing warmth across shifting currents. Those that cannot, they vanish, erased not by teeth but by the quiet hand of climate. And here's your quirky tidbit. During these colder snaps, some shallow seas may have dried into hypersaline lagoons, their water evaporating into briny pools. Imagine a trilobite wandering too far and finding itself in a salty trap, like someone accidentally walking into a salt flat that used to be their kitchen. Not exactly the noble end you'd expect for a creature destined to become a fossil icon. The humor, if you can call it that, lies in how little control these creatures had. One day the water is warm, food is plentiful, predators and prey are locked in their endless dance. The next, a chill sets in and the whole system wobbles. No innovation, no defense, no clever trick can stop the thermostat of the planet from turning. Even Anomalocaris, apex of its world, must bow to a temperature shift. It's like watching the toughest kid on the playground sulk home, because recess got canceled by rain. As you float, you notice how the community responds in stages. First, behavior shifts, creatures grow sluggish, some migrate. Then bodies change over generations. Lineages that endure the cold may evolve hardier shells or more efficient metabolisms. Others branch into new forms entirely, exploiting niches opened by climate stress. The Cambrian arms race is not only predator versus prey, it is life against the planet itself, a test of resilience. The currents swirl colder, and you hug yourself instinctively, though you don't truly belong here. The water has a sharper taste, metallic, as chemistry shifts with the cooling. Oxygen levels dip in some basins, suffocating the depths, while surface waters churn with storms. It is chaotic, yes, but also creative. Each pulse of climate reshapes the cast of characters, pruning some, amplifying others, writing new lines into the script of evolution. Eventually, the warmth seeps back, the seas settle, and the reefs hum with life again. But you now understand something vital. The Cambrian explosion wasn't just about creatures inventing claws, shells, and eyes. It was about surviving a world that refused to hold still. Change was the only constant, and those who endured it carried resilience in their very genes. You let the water rock you gently, half warm, half cool, like slipping between blankets and open air. The Cambrian seas whisper a reminder that even the most dramatic climate swings can fade, leaving behind not silence but new possibility. The sea feels steady for a while, almost too steady, and in that calm you're struck by the puzzle of it all. Why here? Why now? Why did the Cambrian explosion erupt into such dizzying diversity when for billions of years before, life had barely inched past microbes and a few soft-bodied experiments? It's one of the great scientific mysteries, a question that still nags paleontologists today. You watch trilobites marching, worms burrowing, sponges filtering, and you wonder, what flipped the switch? Historically, Charles Darwin himself admitted that the suddenness of the Cambrian explosion troubled him. In On the Origin of Species, he called it a serious difficulty for his theory of gradual evolution. If natural selection is slow and incremental, why did so many complex forms appear almost overnight, geologically speaking? Historians still argue whether the explosion was truly sudden or whether earlier, subtler evolutionary steps are simply hidden in an incomplete fossil record. The leading ideas swirl around you like currents. One current is oxygen, the notion that rising oxygen levels powered the muscles, metabolisms, and nervous systems of larger, more complex animals. Another is predation, the idea that once predators evolved, prey had no choice but to innovate in return, sparking an evolutionary arms race. A third possibility is genetic, the expansion of developmental toolkits like Hox's genes, which allow simple bodies to be rearranged into countless new designs. Give evolution a new set of blueprints, and suddenly the sky, or the sea, is the limit. And here's a quirky tidbit. Some scientists even suggest that Earth's transparency changed during this time. Before the Cambrian, seas may have been murkier, clogged with sediment and microbes. But when water cleared, light penetrated deeper, making vision possible. Once animals could see and be seen, the game changed forever. You could say the Cambrian explosion happened when the lights finally came on. You float in the shallows, imagining each explanation like a note in a chord. Oxygen provides the fuel, genetics the instruments, predation the rhythm, and clearer seas the spotlight. Together, they make music, and the Cambrian explosion is the symphony that results. The beauty is that no single theory must stand alone. Perhaps all were true, weaving together into a tapestry of triggers. Still, the debates continue. Was the explosion really an explosion at all? Or does it just look that way because soft-bodied precursors rarely fossilized? Maybe there was a long, slow buildup, invisible in the record, and the Cambrian only looks like a burst because suddenly creatures had shells and spines that fossilized well. Or maybe it really was a lightning strike of innovation, a perfect storm of conditions that no earlier age could replicate. You smile at the thought of paleontologists bickering across conference tables, waving trilobite fossils like poker cards. The Cambrian explosion is less a solved puzzle and more an ongoing dinner debate that's lasted 150 years. And honestly, it's hard not to admire that. Even with all our technology, some mysteries refuse to be tidy. Evolution, it seems, enjoys keeping a few secrets close. The humor, of course, lies in hindsight. Imagine explaining to a trilobite that billions of years later, humans would sit in lecture halls arguing passionately about why it exists. The trilobite would likely blink its compound eyes, wiggle its antennae, and scuttle off in search of snacks. The Cambrian creatures weren't pondering grand theories. They were too busy trying not to get eaten. You settle deeper into the water, letting the debates swirl around you like gentle eddies. The uncertainty is strangely comforting. Not every mystery needs a neat conclusion. Sometimes it's enough to marvel at the possibilities. The Cambrian explosion reminds you that life doesn't follow straight lines. It stumbles, leaps, experiments, and occasionally erupts. And maybe that's the point. The beauty lies not in knowing exactly why it happened, but in witnessing the astonishing fact that it did. The waters dim slightly as you drift forward, and you sense a quieter mood settling over the Cambrian seas. For all its booming innovation, this era was not without its shadows. The Cambrian explosion conjures images of unstoppable progress, but even in this age of creativity, many lineages blinked out as suddenly as they appeared. Extinction, it seems, has always been part of the rhythm. You pause above a patch of seabed littered with empty shells and collapsed burrows. Life moves on around it. Trilobites scuttle, sponges pump. But here the silence lingers. Some of the oddest Cambrian creatures, the experimental designs, never made it beyond this period. Entire lineages of peculiar worms, armored critters, and reef builders vanished, leaving only faint traces in the fossil record. They were flashes of possibility, sparks that burned bright and quickly faded. Historically, paleontologists mark several extinction pulses within the Cambrian itself. Around 515 million years ago, one event cut down trilobite diversity dramatically, reshuffling who ruled the seas. Later pulses trimmed back other groups, creating openings for newcomers. These weren't the cataclysmic mass extinctions like the Permian or the asteroid strike that doomed the dinosaurs, but they were significant enough to prune the evolutionary tree. Historians still argue whether they were caused by oxygen crashes, cooling seas, or even toxic blooms that poisoned the shallows. You imagine a reef suddenly struck by such a shift. The sponges falter, pumping weakly. Worm burrows collapse as sediments sour without oxygen. Predators like Anomalocaris lose prey, growing desperate, and eventually vanish themselves. It's not drama with fangs and claws. It's a slow fade, a dimming of the lights, ecosystems unraveling quietly until only fragments remain. And here's a quirky tidbit. Some paleontologists jokingly refer to these vanished Cambrian oddballs as failed experiments. Of course, evolution doesn't plan or design. It just tries things and most don't stick. But the phrase captures something true. Creatures like Wewixia with its bristly armor or Deinonychus with its flower-like body were weird one-offs that never found a long-term niche. Their fossils sit in museum drawers like abandoned prototypes, reminders of how unpredictable the Cambrian really was. You glance around, noticing how survivors adapt. Trilobites diversify into new forms after each setback, some growing spines, others flattening their bodies to hug the seafloor. Worms retreat deeper, their burrows twisting into more complex spirals. Sponges experiment with new skeletal materials. Extinction doesn't stop life, it forces it to pivot. Every shadow carves out space for something new. The humor here, oddly enough, lies in perspective. If you'd asked a Cambrian creature what the biggest threat was, it would have pointed, metaphorically at least, to predators. But the true menace was often invisible. Shifts in oxygen, currents, chemistry. It's a little like worrying about pickpockets while ignoring the fact that your rent just doubled. Survival is rarely about the enemy you can see. The seafloor hushes as you drift, the echoes of vanished lineages humming faintly around you. There's sadness in it, yes, but also inevitability. Evolution's stage is ruthless about clearing space for the next act. Those who vanish leave behind not emptiness but opportunity. You exhale, letting the thought sink in. Even here, 500 million years ago, Extinction is not an end but part of the pattern. The Cambrian seas remind you that every loss is tangled with creation, every silence with new music waiting to play. The waters brighten as you drift upward, and for the first time you can compare what you've been seeing to something familiar. The Cambrian seas, for all their strangeness, have echoes in the oceans you know today. Looking down at trilobites grazing across microbial mats, you can't help but think of crabs patrolling tide pools, sponges and archaeocyathid reefs. They remind you of coral gardens in the tropics. Even the arms race between predator and prey feels like the same drama still playing out, just with sleeker actors. You let your mind wander between eras, layering images. A Cambrian sponge pumping water through its porous walls, and beside it, a modern barrel sponge doing the same job, only on a larger scale. A trilobite scuttling across the sand, and beside it, a horseshoe crab shuffling with near-identical rhythm. Anomalocaris slicing through the water, and beside it, a barracuda lunging at a school of fish. Different shapes, different names, same underlying strategies. Historically, scientists often describe Cambrian ecosystems as the first modern-style communities. Before this, life was patchy, dominated by microbes and soft-bodied forms with limited interactions. But in the Cambrian, we see complex food webs, producers, grazers, predators, scavengers, engineers. It looks in miniature, much like today's reefs and coasts. Historians still argue how fully modern the Cambrian was. Some see it as a crude rehearsal, others as a genuine beginning. You hover over a sponge reef, watching small creatures dart in and out of crevices. It's not unlike snorkeling on a coral reef today, with fish weaving through branches and eels hiding in holes. The difference is in scale. Cambrian reefs are smaller, patchier, and quieter. No colorful corals waving, no bright parrotfish crunching on algae, no sea turtles drifting overhead. But the principle is the same. Structure creates shelter, shelter fosters diversity. And here's your quirky tidbit. Horseshoe crabs, often called living fossils, are sometimes compared to trilobites because of their similar body plan. The funny part, horseshoe crabs are closer relatives of spiders than of crabs. So next time you see one scuttling on a beach, think of it as your friendly neighborhood land spider that never left the water. The humor in comparison comes naturally. Picture explaining to a Cambrian trilobite that its distant cousins will one day live in suburban basements as cockroaches, while humans shriek at them with rolled-up newspapers. Evolution doesn't just invent, it repurposes, often in ways that would baffle the original cast. From your calm vantage point, the continuity is soothing. Yes, the creatures look alien with their spines, stalks, and claws, but their roles are familiar. Filter feeders clean the water. Grazers recycle nutrients. Predators keep populations in check. Scavengers mop up the rest. It's the same ocean play, just with different costumes. You tilt your head upward, picturing a modern coral reef in your mind. The riot of color, the darting fish, the sound of snapping shrimp. Then you blink back to the Cambrian, where the palette is duller, the cast stranger, but the rhythm unmistakable. The Cambrian seas hum with the same energy, the same give and take of survival that defines life today. It makes you chuckle softly. People sometimes think of the Cambrian as impossibly distant, alien beyond recognition. But spend enough time watching and you see yourself in it. Your world's ecosystems, your own body's ancestry, even the rules of conflict and cooperation that still shape you. The Cambrian isn't foreign, it's family, just with a weird haircut. You let yourself drift between times, half in the Cambrian, half in the modern sea. The overlap is oddly reassuring, like seeing baby photos of someone you know well. The same smile, the same eyes, just softer and stranger. The Cambrian seas remind you that the world you live in is not brand new. It's the latest verse in a very old song. You linger now, letting the Cambrian waters settle around you, and a new thought rises. These strange creatures with their spines and stalks and claws are not just curiosities sealed in stone. They are, in a quiet way, part of you. Their experiments in body design echo down the ages, imprinted in your DNA. Every breath you take, every step you walk, carries faint whispers of Cambrian seas. Look at yourself for a moment. Your bilateral symmetry, the way your body is split left and right. That basic layout was refined here, among worms burrowing through mats and trilobites trundling along the sand. Your segmented spine, its distant cousins can be found in the Cambrian too, in chordates like Pichia, a delicate, eel-like swimmer that wriggled with a notochord for support. It doesn't look like much, just a slender ribbon poolsing in the current, but it's one of your oldest relatives. Historically, Pichia and similar creatures represent the dawn of the chordates, the lineage that will give rise to fish, reptiles, mammals, and eventually you. When Charles Walcott first described Pichia in the early 1900s, he barely recognized its importance. Only later did scientists realize that these unassuming swimmers might be the ancestors of vertebrates. Historians still argue whether Pichia was truly the first, or if other Cambrian chordates shared the stage, quietly carrying the blueprint forward. You watch one of these tiny swimmers undulate past, its body rippling gracefully. Along its sides, faint muscle bands twitch, the first hints of the powerful musculature that will one day propel sharks, whales, and marathon runners. In its head, primitive structures suggest the beginnings of a brain. Fragile, yes, but enough to set the stage for minds that will write poetry and invent Wi-Fi. And here's a quirky tidbit. Your own Hox genes, the molecular architects that tell your body where to put arms, legs, and ribs, were already at work in these Cambrian ancestors. The same toolkit that arranged Pichia's muscles eventually arranged your own fingers. So, the next time you wiggle your toes, you can thank a half-billion-year-old worm-like swimmer for getting the coordinates right. You glance at trilobites and smile. Their compound eyes with their crystalline lenses aren't directly your heritage, but the idea of vision spreading through ecosystems set the stage for your own eyes to evolve later. The Cambrian world was the testing ground, and your senses are echoes of those first experiments in sight, touch, and motion. The humor in this realization is deliciously humbling. Imagine telling a Pichia, "Congratulations, you're going to be my great-great-great-grandparent about 1 billion times removed." It would twitch its little notochord, unimpressed, and carry on eating plankton. The creatures of the Cambrian weren't striving for human futures. They were simply surviving. And yet, by surviving, they left fingerprints all over you. You lie back in the water, closing your eyes, and you can almost feel those fingerprints. The rhythm of your heartbeat echoes the pulse of Cambrian circulation. The twitch of your muscles echoes those first wriggles across microbial mats. Even your curiosity, this desire to gaze backward into deep time, is a legacy of nervous systems that first flickered awake 500 million years ago. It's comforting, almost funny, to think of yourself as a layered fossil, each cell carrying whispers of Cambrian blueprints. You are not separate from this world. You are its continuation. The trilobites may be gone, the Anomalocaris vanished, but their experiments live on in you, sitting here, letting your eyelids grow heavy. The Cambrian is not just history. It is ancestry, written into your bones and blood. And the longer you float here, the easier it is to feel not like a visitor, but like a very old resident returning home. The light softens now as you drift toward the quiet end of this Cambrian journey. The water is calmer, the currents gentler, as though even the ocean itself knows it's time to rest. You watch trilobites tracing their last paths across the sand, sponges filtering in steady silence, and strange shapes like hallucigenia and apobinia fatting into the murk. The explosion of life still hums all around you, but here in the stillness, it feels less like chaos and more like a lullaby whispered by the sea. You think back to the shoreline you first saw, bare continents, crimson with iron, no plants, no trees, just silence above and turbulence below. You remember the mats of microbes, the shimmer of new eyes, the menace of Anomalocaris slicing through the water, and the spiky humor of Hallucigenia striding upside down in paleontologists' imaginations. You've seen reefs rise from fragile scaffolds, worms rewrite the seabed, predators and prey invent new tools in their endless race. You've watched climate swing like a pendulum, erasing some lineages and amplifying others. Historically, the Cambrian explosion lasted about 20 to 25 million years, a geological heartbeat, yet long enough to seed nearly every major animal group alive today. From arthropods to chordates, mollusks to echinoderms, the blueprints of modern ecosystems were drafted in these waters. Historians still argue whether it deserves the title of explosion, but whatever word you choose, the legacy is undeniable. Without this burst of invention, your own lineage would never have taken root. And here's your quirky tidbit to carry with you. Some Cambrian creatures were so strange that, when first reconstructed, they looked more like props from a sci-fi movie than real animals. Paleontologists joked that if they'd been alive today, we'd have to redesign aquariums just to house them. The Cambrian seas were less a zoo and more a surreal art gallery, with evolution as the eccentric curator. You look around one last time. The reefs shimmer faintly, trilobites etch trails in the mud, worms churn the sand, and delicate swimmers ripple through shafts of fatting light. It all feels familiar now, not alien at all, but like an ancient version of home. You are no longer just an observer. You are stitched into this tapestry, your own body carrying echoes of these seas. The humor, as always, slips in gently. Imagine trying to explain to a trilobite that its descendants, distant cousins, would invent smartphones, pizza, and reality TV. The trilobite would likely scuttle away, unimpressed, perhaps leaving a sarcastic groove in the mud. And yet it's true. All the absurdity of modern life has roots here, in these quiet, glowing waters. The Cambrian dream begins to fade now. The shapes blur, the sounds soften, the water rocks you like a cradle. You are carried not forward or backward, but inward, into the slow, steady hum of deep time. The explosion is over. The seas are calm, and you are floating, weightless, held gently in the arms of a half-billion-year-old ocean. Close your eyes. Let the last trilobite trail fade into darkness. Let the reefs dissolve into stillness. The Cambrian has given you its story, and now it offers you its rest. And now, as you settle into the quiet, let the images of those ancient seas soften and dissolve. The spines of Hallucigenia, the shimmering eyes of trilobites, the sweeping shadow of Anomalocaris, they all recede into a gentle blur, as though they were never creatures at all, but only ripples in a dream. The water that once teemed with experiments now stills, its surface smoothing into glass, its depths darkening into calm. Your breath slows with the tide, each inhale rising like a gentle wave, each exhale falling like sand drifting to the seafloor. The ocean of deep time holds you steady, its embrace patient, unhurried, eternal. You no longer need to swim or to chase or to hide. You are carried as effortlessly as a trilobite cradled by the current. Even the continents fade. The barren rocks of Gondwana, the empty shorelines, the thunderclouds sweeping over lifeless plains. They slip into shadow, irrelevant to this moment of rest. What remains is only rhythm, the hum of the sea, the whisper of long-vanished lives, the memory of evolution at play. There is no need to think about beginnings or endings now. The Cambrian explosion has already done its work. It has built the blueprints, sparked the stories, and left its fingerprints on your very body. All you must do is rest in its quiet afterglow, as if you too were pressed gently into stone, preserved in stillness. So let go, sink deeper, and feel the silence thicken around you. The dream has carried you across 500 million years, and now it brings you back to the soft dark of your own room. Let your eyelids close, your breath steady, and your thoughts dissolve like ripples fading into calm water.